Hello, my name is Candace Golliver, and today we are looking at lab safety and chemical usage, storage, and disposal in Alabama public schools. Why would we need a workshop on lab safety and chemical storage and disposal? Many of our new teachers, many of you, took science classes where chemicals were already prepared for you and the professor disposed of the chemicals for you. So most of us, when we came out of college, we did not have the training that we needed to properly handle chemicals. Several years ago, I went into a school in North Alabama and I did an initial chemical inventory for them. They had a lot of old chemicals. Some of them were over 30 years old. They did not have a chemical inventory. There were not any safety data sheets for the chemicals. The chemicals were not stored correctly. There were several chemicals that pose an extreme hazard, such as dry potassium metal, red phosphorus, and sodium peroxide, which were all three explosion hazards, fire hazards. So I contacted the local fire department. They came in and removed the extreme hazards and got rid of those properly. I helped the school create a chemical inventory. I worked with ADM to remove the other chemicals. Here's a picture that shows what their storage shelves looked like after the initial cleanup. There were several unknown chemicals where the labels had fallen off, and so we put those in bags to help contain them. Chemicals were in alphabetical order. They were not stored according to Flynn guidelines. They had lots of mercury, over 50 pounds of it, and so ADM came in and got rid of it. And luckily all this happened before the school was blown away by E5 tornado. Now at that time ADM was getting a grant to dispose of chemicals for high schools. The last time I spoke with someone from ADM, they are not getting that grant anymore. So schools are on their own to hire a reputable company to come in and dispose of chemicals. When it comes to regulations applying to Alabama public schools, according to RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, schools are considered to be conditionally exempt small quantity generators, and they are responsible for chemicals from cradle to grave. So when a school gets a chemical, they are responsible for it even after it has been properly disposed of. So we need to make sure that we're hiring companies to take our chemicals and dispose of those in a proper manner. I'd been told once before that a school got rid of some chemicals and the company that took them threw them in a ditch, and the school system had to pay for the chemical cleanup. When schools dispose of hazardous waste, they must keep records for at least 3 years, make sure that they use a facility that is permitted to manage hazardous waste. And it's best to talk to ADM to get prior approval for disposal when you're choosing a company to do that for you. ADM also makes suggestions on controlling school chemical lab waste, such as only purchasing a small amount of chemicals, just the amount of chemicals that you will use within the year, making sure that you store those properly. ADM recommends using the Flynn catalog and their suggested storage procedures. For waste disposal, making sure that if you do have somebody else come get it, make sure that they are ADM approved. And waste minimization. Don't buy more than you're going to use so that when the chemicals go out of date, you won't have all that extra waste sitting around. When it comes to lab safety in the state of Alabama, one quote that I liked was, "The guiding principle is to promote safety in order to prevent injury." The Alabama State Department developed a science safety CD in 2002, and all schools should still have a copy of that. If they don't, I believe that they can purchase one for about $40 from the Alabama State Department of Education. When it comes to taking care of kids in our classrooms, we have a due care in order to avoid negligence. And so our three duties are to instruct, to supervise, and to properly maintain equipment. We want to make sure that we do the lab first, check out all the equipment first, see if there are any hazards, and make adjustments to eliminate those hazards. Teachers must observe all the rules set by the Alabama Department of Education and by their local school boards. In the state of Alabama, there is an Alabama goggle law that says that everybody that's doing labs that use chemicals or have physical objects that could, hit you in the eye, all those labs should be provided with safety goggles. All those students and teachers who are in those labs. It says, chemical or combined chemical physical laboratories involving caustic or explosive chemicals or hot liquids or solids. Safety goggles are needed. And going along with this law, I think the big takeaway is that the Board of Education for each school is responsible for furnishing the eye protection. So students shouldn't have to buy those themselves. Teachers shouldn't have to beg for them. It's the responsibility of the school system to provide the eye protection to all that are taking that course. I have listed here the Alabama Educator Code of Ethics as far as lab safety goes. One provision of the code protects the health, safety, and general welfare of students and educators. In Standard 1 under Professional Conduct, one part of the standard is the expectation that teachers provide appropriate supervision of students. And with Standard 4, under the teacher-student professional relationship, one example of unethical conduct is committing any act of child endangerment, and that includes the lab. So as teachers, it is our responsibility to foresee any dangers and eliminate those dangers, or at least warn students about those potential dangers in order to keep everybody safe. OSHA suggests that every chemistry lab or any lab that contains chemicals have a chemical hygiene plan, and that is a detailed lab safety plan for accidents and for emergencies. If your school has a safety plan, I would recommend writing in what needs to be done if there is an accident or an incident in the science labs. Something else recommended for Alabama schools is the right to know laws. And that just says that students have the right to know, they have the right to understand how to read safety data sheets, labels, and their warnings. Teachers need to be trained, students need to be trained, so that if there is an accident, students know where to look for the correct information on how to handle that particular situation. Students need to understand the hazards to each chemical that they'll be using so that they are properly informed and you can help them make correct decisions when it comes to using those chemicals. Now, since Alabama is not a state that has its own mandated OSHA program, they suggest that prudent policy and practice strongly suggest that these codes and standards should be followed. So who's responsible for enforcing the regulations or the recommendations? First is the local school board. Also, ADEM, the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, the school, the administrators, the Alabama Department of Education can monitor the situation. You also have the local emergency management agencies, the EMS for the areas. When it comes to chemical documentation, for all chemicals that you have on site, you need to make sure that you have a chemical inventory and that you have safety data sheets. It is also recommended that your principal and your local fire department have a copy of these as well, just in case there is an accident, so that they will know what you have on hand. When preparing to use chemicals, you should always consult the safety data sheets before handling an unfamiliar chemical. Take appropriate safety precautions as mentioned in the safety data sheets, such as wearing goggles, aprons, gloves, breathing mask, whatever is suggested in those safety data sheets. Use a fume hood when needed and make sure that it's working properly first. Also, consider the lethal dosage limits in the air and by direct contact when choosing a chemical. If the LD50 is a low amount of chemical, then you need to find a different chemical to use. LD50, that stands for lethal dosage that would kill half the population exposed to that chemical. It is based on body mass, so a smaller person would be affected by the chemical more than a larger person would, but it's still important. If it has a low LD50, choose a different chemical. Also, make sure that the room is properly ventilated when you're using chemicals. I've got a note here that you can get your chemicals, your solutions already prepared from Alabama Science in Motion. And so if you use the labs that I provide, then some of this, you won't really have to worry about. Now, when students are in the lab, you should never leave them unattended. That goes back to that due care and duty of supervision. You should require that the students know the lab safety rules, have a signed safety contract for each student. Make sure that the students know where the safety shower is, the eye wash, the fire extinguisher, fire blanket, and also make sure that they know how to properly use them. Please require all your students to wear proper safety goggles. Make safety gloves and aprons available when necessary. And again, proper ventilation when you're using the chemicals or the burners. Something else that you need to do is to teach students about the right to know laws, meaning that they have a right to know the chemicals that they'll be using, the hazards of those chemicals. Make sure that safety data sheets are available to the students, and make sure that the students know how to read and use those safety data sheets. The teacher should always control the types and the amounts of chemicals that are available to students. Make sure that all reactions that produce toxic gases are produced in the fume hood. Tell students how to properly dispose of chemicals and oversee that disposal. And as always, have the science department's chemical hygiene plan available just in case it's needed. When it comes to storing chemicals, all chemicals should be stored in an area that remains locked when not in use. So students should not have access to the chemical storage room. The chemical storage room needs to be well ventilated, and chemicals need to be stored by compatibility. And ADAM recommends using Flynn's storage system, but there are a couple other references that you could use as well, such as Scholar Chemicals. Inorganic acids should be stored in a separate designated acid cabinet. However, nitric acid should not be stored with the other acids unless it is in a separate container. Flammables should be stored in separate designated flammables cabinets. Chemicals should be stored in a designated chemical room if possible. And the teacher should report in writing any problems they notice concerning the lab and chemical storage to the administrator, such as unsecured rooms, poor ventilation, dangerous chemicals, any other safety issues that the administration needs to know about. When it comes to chemical disposal, ADAM recommends using the Flynn reference catalog for chemical disposal. On the safety data sheets, there are also recommendations for safety disposal. If it says that it's okay to go down the drain, make sure that you check with your local wastewater treatment plant first. Also, make sure that you use lots of water in order to dilute it. Any hazardous waste generated during lab should be stored in well-labeled, chemical-appropriate containers until proper disposal can be made. With Alabama Science in Motion, we do not use very many chemicals that are considered to be hazardous waste. Most of the chemicals we use and the products produced can be washed down the drain with lots of water. Also noted here is if you have an acid or a base, make sure that you dilute it and neutralize it before you try putting it down the drain. Because if the pipes are metal, the acid can react with those metal pipes and create holes. Several resources are listed here for lab safety and handling chemicals. One is some handouts from ADEM. Another is the Alabama State Department of Education Science CD that they put out in 2002. EPA's SC3, their school's chemical cleanout campaign. You can visit their website and see their recommendations. Another resource is Flynn Scientific Reference Catalog. You can get that in print or go online to flynnsci.com, and they have a whole section on lab safety. They have a section where you can print out safety data sheets for all your chemicals. Scholar Chemistry is another resource, as well as the National Science Teachers Association, nsta.org. All right, are there any questions or comments? Again, the purpose of this professional development is to help you when you start off, in the chemistry lab. You may go in and see chemicals similar to the pictures that I showed you earlier. You may have to develop your own chemical inventory and print off your own safety data sheets. And I can help you with that. If you have any questions or any problems, in the lab, any concerns, just send me an email and I'll try to get the answers to you for those questions. All right. Thank you.